Huma ma'am, it is always a pleasure for us to have you with us. Ma'am needs no introduction. Uh, but for the students who have joined us for the first time, there are students from other universities as well. Huma ma'am is a PhD degree holder from AMU Aligarh. She is presently working as Associate Professor in Department of English, Maulana Azad National Urdu University, Lucknow campus. She has a deep interest in post-colonial literature, Indian literature in English, and literature with environmental concerns, and has recently worked on minor research project titled Eco-Critical Analysis of Sheikh Mada's Heart of Redness and The Whale Collar. Her works have been published. The published work includes the research papers on Orientalism, post-colonialism, eco-criticism, and some other areas as well in various reputed national and international journals. Ma'am, the platform is all yours. We are eagerly waiting for your deliberation. Ma'am.
Thanks a lot, Saket, for introducing in a wonderful manner. Okay, and yes, definitely from my side also, it is always a pleasure to be a part of your institution and to interact with you all. And you all are always also eager to have me. So it's always a mutual admiration, I think, for the college and from your side for me. Okay, so I'll start with the presentation, and so I think I can begin with my presentation. Okay, just a minute. Can you all please see this? Am I audible, and are the slides visible
Yes,
to you?
Yes,
the
ma'am, you are
slide is
audible.
also, you are also visible, slide is also visible, and audio is quite okay.
Okay, that's wonderful. Okay, so as you all are also familiar with, the students I'm particularly addressing to, that since last 3 days, I think you have been having deliberations and presentations from various reputed teachers on Renaissance, the various aspects of Renaissance. And so today I will be dealing with this poetry, Renaissance poetry particularly. So let me just... Okay. So I begin with two quotations from Sir Philip Sidney, and he writes, "Fool, said my muse, look in thy heart and write." And there is this other quotation from Philip Sidney again, from his very famous critical work, The Defense of Poesy, or The Apology of Poesy. Nature never set forth the earth in so rich tapestry as diverse poets have done, neither with pleasant rivers, fruitful trees, sweet-smelling flowers, nor whatsoever else may make the too much loved earth more lovely. Her world is brazen, the poets only deliver a golden. So I'm beginning with these quotations of Sir Philip Sidney because you see that first of the quote is reflecting the that emotional side, particularly the importance of emotions in the Renaissance poetry. And this was a major move coming out of the medieval times, and how individual became so important. Okay, that Renaissance humanism that we famously talk about. And the second one, from The Defense of Poesy, it is speaking about the importance that is being given to a poet. You all must be aware of that, how in this Defense of Poesy, Sir Philip Sidney compares a poet to a prophet, and then goes on to compare him to the creator, the God. And this is how the poet is able to turn things ultimately into golden. That is what he is talking about. Now, moving on to I will summarize very briefly. I'll talk about the major points of Renaissance, the major features, rather I should say, because you all are already familiar with the chief characteristics of Renaissance. So I will not deliberate much in detail. I will just briefly, so that you to put that in a particular context. Okay, so I will briefly ponder over that. And so you already know that Renaissance is the revival or the rebirth of classical philosophy, thought, and learning. And it is during Renaissance European art, architecture, culture, and literature reached a high point. Okay, so it was not, this manifestation of Renaissance was not just there in literature, it was there in art, it was there in architecture, and it was during this time that all of these things, they reached a high point. And like, I have also posted a photograph. This has been like, this is from my personal collection when I have been to Florence. And you can see in the background that there is this cathedral, Florence Cathedral, which is on the Michelangelo hill that is there. So you see that how these distinct sort of art that was there, the great painters that all belong to this age. And then you find that like, if I talk about Renaissance and how it spanned through, not only, of course, it originated in Italy, then how finally it culminated down in England,
Ma'am,
and that was
sorry to
in
interrupt,
England.
ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, we are still in the first slide. The first slide is visible to us still.
What happened? Can you see it now?
No, ma'am.
Just a minute.
Your title slide
Now,
is visible. Now we
now,
can see.
Yes, ma'am. Now it is visible. Yes.
okay. So I'll go it this way. So this was the photograph that I was talking about, that you can see in the background this Florence Cathedral, okay, the dome of this very famous dome, and this was visible from the Michelangelo hill that I was standing there, and how this particular photograph that has been taken. So I was talking about that how it spans. It began in Italy around 14th century, and like. And if we talk about the English Renaissance, how it is, as poet like Milton coming as late as in the late 17th century, that we see that his works, particularly the poetical works, how till that time around 1660 or so, so that is late into the 17th century, although various historians and various writers, they give different dates, so there is no fixed date to it. So this is just the rough span of the Renaissance. And then this particular time produced greatest of the writers, artists, statesmen, and scientists. And and there was this spirit of inquiry. Okay, how the writers, the philosophers, they started challenging the established thought. That was something very unique about this time, because it was so usually how it is being talked about, that how Renaissance, it followed the medieval times, the Dark Ages. Actually, the Dark Ages were actually not so dark, so to say. It is only that there was this corrupt practices that were prevalent in the church, particularly that how it was thought that religion or church cannot be questioned. So that this Renaissance gave that particular spirit of inquiry in each and everything, that is, be it religion or be it other fields of life, or other things of life, that is science. Okay, and that is how I'll now talk about this natural philosophy. Okay, that how Aristotle, like how they borrowed from the concepts of the ancient classics like Aristotle and Ptolemy, who was the Greek philosopher, and how they borrowed the ideas and started to even question what earth is all about, because natural philosophy essentially deals with the study of nature and physical universe. So this was something in the ancient times. Of course, there were these great philosophers and thinkers who had already like pondered over these things. So there was a renewed interest in all spheres, be it science or be it art or literature, even politics. Okay, so even this age produced, as I said, some of the greatest statesmen. Okay, So that is what you find. And then it challenges the ideas of established institutions in all spheres. As I said, it was a fervent time of explorations and discoveries. Of course, you all know new lands were discovered, okay, and new discoveries were made, new scientific advancement, as I said. Over here, I will even maybe refer to Galileo, okay, and how he has like made this telescope, and there is of course reference, and how this was a major advancement that has happened during that time. So this all opened new horizons for man, both materially and intellectually, and consequently affected the beliefs and practices of people, that is social, intellectual, as well as religious. Okay, so how this is how it affected all these spheres of thinking of man, of be it the social sphere, the intellectual, or the religious life. So that is it. And then now moving on. So is this next slide visible, Saket?
Yes, visible.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So now I move on to speak about, that was just a brief summary. I was not like detailing about Renaissance as such. It is only just to contextualize you about Renaissance. And then I move on to talk about the how the poetry of that time, it flowered and it shaped. Okay, so speaking about Renaissance in England, these are the rough dates. That is 1500 to 1660. Some say 1668. So this is like taking it to the, as I said, till after the publication of Paradise Lost by Milton. So Renaissance consolidated and shaped English language and literature and gave it a distinct identity of its own. I say distinct identity because till now, how English as a language itself, how it was just coming into existence. It was around 11th century that how the language was developed, and the Old English, and then of course at the time of Chaucer, the Old English, and so now so Middle English, and then finally moving it to the kind of English that was being used during Renaissance by Shakespeare. So that is how Renaissance and the Renaissance poets, how they provided that particular distinct identity during this time by writing excessively different themes, different things that were available to them, and they took inspiration from the classics. Okay, so the English poets, they looked at the Greek and Roman classics for inspiration. The translation of the classics hugely contributed to new ideas and material to Renaissance poetry. Okay, so these were the very the classical writers who were very famous during this time. That is particularly Homer, Horace, Virgil, and Ovid. Virgil's speaking about Virgil's epic Aeneid. Okay, and Ovid's Metamorphoses. Okay, so all of these works that these Renaissance poets, the English Renaissance poets, they were looking at, and because of the printing press and because of the translation that was now easily available, how these writers could look back and could find new themes and new inspirations to work on. So although when I say so, it is not a regressive movement, so to say. We are talking about a new flowering. It is a rebirth, a revival. So this when I say looking back, and usually when we speak about Renaissance, we often say that how they were inspired by the classics. So actually this is not a looking back in a regressive manner, but rather it is looking back into the past with a Renaissance perspective. That is an enlightened perspective. Okay, so it is not the blind following, but rather it is and it is not at all in any way, this is not even any sort of plagiarism. Rather it is giving a new shape, or like taking inspiration from these classics, and creating a very good, very nice poetry and other works. Okay, so like since I am focusing only on poetry, I'm not speaking about drama and prose writings. Okay, so that will be covered in other lectures. So the classical and Christian elements are blended effectively, giving importance to individuality of man. There is, of course, these two paradoxes, they go hand in hand in Renaissance poetry. There are Christian elements at side by side. There is, of course, the classical elements, and that is one example again can be Paradise Lost, and of course even writings like Astrophel and Stella and all of these. So how there is a combination, and even the Fairy Queen. Okay, so there is Spenser's Fairy Queen. So like you will find that there is a blending of the classical elements and the Christian elements, and how there is this again the dominance of the individuality of man. That is how man and his individuality is being asserted in all of these works and the poetry of this time. So Renaissance poetry was full of love and youthful vigor. The court poetry was in vogue, because that was a very happening place at that time. And particularly you will find that how the kings and the queens of the time, because when we speak of Renaissance as a whole, even the English Renaissance, it covered different ages. Okay, the Elizabethan, the Jacobean, and the Carolines. There were how the powers were shifting from one hand to the other, but how mostly the poets were patronized by the kings and the queens. And this was either to appreciate and to eulogize them, or to entertain the court. So one more thing that was there, since this kind of court poetry was written essentially for a particular circle of people, a coterie. Okay, so what was happening was that how these writings or the poetry of the time was not much published during its own time. It was published only later on. And when we talk about court poetry, there was, of course, court politics also that was there. And so like sometimes they were in great favor, at other times how they suffered because of that. So and poetry was used as a tool for persuasion and diplomacy. Okay, so that you find in Fairy Queen, that you find in several other works. Okay, so how it is a tool for persuasion and diplomacy, to be near the king or the queen, to be in the good books and to get positions. Okay, so that is the kind of like how poetry is being used for as a tool for persuasion and diplomacy. And then love, you find that this was a major theme. Okay, like love in its various dimensions. Okay, I should say that is love is not just the physical love, it is the platonic love, it is the spiritual love. Okay, so love for the beloved. Okay, so all sorts of all the facets of love were explored and experimented upon by the poets of the time. And this was a major theme, particularly in the sonnets. And I will deal separately after this slide. I will deal with the sonnets, okay, and because this was the most like famous forms or the types of poetry that was prevalent during the time. And during the Renaissance, we also see that there was a moving beyond the rules and restrictions. Okay, so like how the poetry, the verse was not binded by specific rules. There was much liberation that we found during the time. There was the use of the blank verse or the unrhymed iambic pentameter. Okay, that was used. Some of the greatest English poetry of the time was written in blank verse. Later on, we will see that even Paradise Lost was also written in blank verse. Then Renaissance can be considered as the precursor of the modern times, and you find that nowadays this particular, instead of using any other term, how many of the current critics, they prefer to call it as early moderns, because the kind of poetry that we see today is the outcome of whatever happened, whatever experimentation and translations and all sorts of poetry that was being written. So this is how the Renaissance and its poets and otherwise also they can be called as the early moderns. And so Renaissance is often considered as the golden age of poetry. Okay, on my next slide, And now I'll be speaking on sonnets and sonnet sequences, because this form became very prevalent and famous during Renaissance times. And I'm of course talking in the context of the English Renaissance, the English poetry. And of course, the origin of sonnet was Italy. It was derived from Petrarchan sonnet. Okay, so sonnet is essentially defining about sonnet. It is a poem of 14 lines with a specific rhyme scheme, and it expresses a single emotion. And it is derived from the Italian word sonetto, meaning a little sound or a strain. And as I said, that it was associated with the Italian poet Petrarch. And if we speak about the Italian sonnet and how it is different from the English sonnet, of course, the essential 14-line structure is followed by the English poets as well. But the Italian sonnet was divided into two parts. Okay, it was essentially an octave and a sestet. Okay, so like stanza of 8 lines and then 6 lines. So octave was consisting of 2 stanzas of 4 lines each. That is, the 4 lines makes a quatrain, and the 2 stanzas of 3 lines each, that were called as tercets. Okay, so the rhyme scheme was usually A B B A C D C C D C, or the sestet can have other possible arrangements, like the letter part, that is C D C D C D, or C D E C D E. Then speaking about the English sonnet, this was, of course, worked upon by Surrey, and it was he who used this kind of rhyme scheme in his sonnets. But of course, it is rather associated with the name of Shakespeare. We often talk about Shakespearean sonnet. Okay, Shakespearean sonnet is nothing else but this improvised version of the rhyme scheme that was done by Surrey. Okay, so the English sonnet was written in 3 quatrains. Okay, that is 4 lines each, 3 parts of 4 lines each, and then final couplet. And the rhyme scheme was A B A B C D C D E F E F, then the final couplet G G. Okay, and then Spenserian sonnet, Spenser also worked on it, and there was a minor difference in the rhyme scheme that Spenser adopted. That is, you see that how this second rhyme is again repeated in the second quatrain. So that is like A B B C B C C D C D, and then E E. So a sonnet was, of course, the most prevalent form, or it was like the most favored form of poetical writings. But there were these other forms, and all of these, they were actually also had their Greek origin, most of them. So there were these, the poets during the Renaissance times, they were writing lyrics, they were writing epics, elegies, odes, and pastoral poetry also. Okay, and like inspiration of all of these forms was usually the classics, the classics of antiquity, and they were taking it from there. Now, before I go into detail regarding the Renaissance poets, you will observe that Renaissance poets, they were coming from three three types of scenarios, or three walks of life, rather, I should say. So this was either they belonged to the court. As I said, there were the court poets, and like some of the poets were clergymen, like the metaphysical poets like John Dunn and George Herbert. And there were these writers, poets like Christopher Marlowe, William Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, who were essentially, they were playwrights. They were more famous as dramatists, but then they also wrote good poetry. Okay, so as I said, the court poets, prominent among them, Thomas Wyatt, Earl of Surrey, Sydney, Walter Raleigh, and there are many others. Okay, and then the poets who were associated with the church, the clergymen, and then the poets associated or coming from the theatre. Now, speaking about the court poets, okay, and the first one to have brought sonnet to England, that was Sir Thomas Wyatt, okay, and he belonged to the court of Henry VIII, and one of his most remarkable achievement, as I said, was that like during his visits, he worked on, and he saw, and he particularly got influenced by this poetical type, and that is how he brought this sonnet to England. And he was, as I said, he was greatly influenced by the great master of the Italian sonnet, that is Petrarch, and he imitated and translated sonnets of Petrarch into English. So you see that many of the Elizabethan writers, Elizabethan poets particularly, they were also dedicating themselves to the translation of the classics, and besides classics, they all were also translating the other European, the continental Renaissance poets also. Okay. Because what is like translation is one medium through which what is going on, or what has been the best in the past, which that can be revived, that can be made into an inspiration, okay, that can be provided, so like to other poets to follow. So that was one thing which was quite prevalent, the translations of the classics and also of the other contemporary continental poets, that was being done during the time. And besides writing sonnets and working and improvising on the sonnets, or experimenting, I should say, on the sonnets, Wyatt was also writing satires, songs, and epigrams. And his, as was the usual case with the Renaissance writers, particularly the poets, that their works were not published. They were not publishing their works because they were essentially writing for the court and for the entertainment of the court, and for celebrating the kings and the queens, okay. So his works were also published only after his death. And as was the practice among the court poets, the poems were largely circulated as manuscripts. His love poems, they are total 96 in number, and they were printed in Totel's Miscellany. That was the famous work of that time. Then 31 sonnets, out of which 10 were translations from Petrarch, and Wyatt died at an early age, at the age of 39, due to fever. And then I move on to, because these, the name of Wyatt and Surrey, it comes together, okay, because they were quite close to each other, and both of them, they worked on the Italian sonnet, and how they were responsible to improvise it for the English public and for the English readership. So like how he Surrey met a tragic end, and he was executed in 1547, and a very promising career was nipped in the bud. And he was brought up in the aristocratic tradition of English and French courts. The promising young life met a tragic end as he was beheaded on the charges of treason in 1547. And Surrey is the only poet whose name figures on Richard Tottle's Songs and Sonnets, written by the Right Honourable Lord Henry Howard, late Earl of Surrey. So it's not that my works were all poets and Surrey's, but the name of Surrey is, or rather, it was written on the cover page itself. Okay, so that is one thing that was a great achievement of that time. And then there were 40 poems of Surrey which were included in this particular book, and Surrey brought blank verse to English poetry. Okay, so that we were already talking about the use of the blank verse in Renaissance poetry, and Surrey was the one who brought the blank verse to English poetry, and that was particularly through the translation of Virgil's Aeneid. Later, much of great Renaissance poetry was written in blank verse. In the hands of Wyatt and Surrey, English poetry became more personal. Then I move on to the other poets. Can't exactly call them as minor poets, but actually these were the poets who contributed in the consolidation of English language and poetry. Okay, there was Thomas Churchyard, George Gascoigne, George Turboville, Thomas Sackville. So all of these, and most of them, as you can see, they were courtiers, they were soldiers. So Thomas Churchyard was a soldier and a poet, and he wrote autobiographical verses, and these are his various works: Churchyard Chips, Churchyard Choice, and there is some misprint over here: Churchyard's Charge, The Worthiness of Wales, and Churchyard's Challenge, Churchyard's Charity. So these are the various works of Thomas Churchyard. Then another significant poet, that is George Gascoigne. He was also a soldier and a courtier, and these are his works: 100 Sundry Flowers Bound Up in One Small Poesy. It is an anthology of courtly poets, and Flowers, Herbs, and Weeds, and Lullaby of a Lover. And he was, as I said, that how translations contributed a lot in consolidating the language. So George Gascoigne also translated the Greek tragedy Jocasta. And then the next is George Turboville and his work Epitaphs, Epigrams, Songs, and Sonnets. And he also published translations of heroical epistles. Then there is Thomas Sackville. I have mentioned this Mirror of Magistrates because this is in a way a collaborative collection, okay? And Thomas Sackville also contributed one poem, that is Complaint of Henry, Duke of Buckingham, to this particular collection, and it served as a source for many Elizabethan writers. Another important contribution is his poem Induction, written in allegorical style, and recounts the poet's journey to the infernal region. And Sackville, you find that particularly as a poet, he excelled in his technical skills. Now moving on to Sidney. Okay, so the poet and the critic with whom we started our lecture. So he is often portrayed and epitomized as the Renaissance man. Okay, he was because he was having all the qualities of a scholar, a poet, a courtier, knight. Okay, so he was chivalrous. Okay, so he was learned, and but at the same time he was impulsive. And so of course that was the reason, of course, that he like several times he was like out of favor, and sometimes he was quite appreciated and favored at other times because of his impulsive behavior. So that those were the kind of qualities that Sidney represented. And that was the fashion of the time, to take continental tours. And Sidney also took the continental tour of 3 years, and he was greatly influenced by the Italian painters and poets of the time. And this tour shaped the personality of Sidney. And Sidney like particularly is responsible for the vogue of sonnet sequences or cycles. Okay, there are these numerous sonnets that are written and they are linked to each other through a particular theme which is there throughout all the sonnets. Okay, it is like connected in some way or the other, and these are the sonnet sequences or cycles that were quite famous during that time. And he experimented with the rhyme scheme and tried to free the English sonnet from the strict trappings of rhyme of the original Italian. And his because, as I said, that he started the vogue of sonnet sequences. So his Astrophel and Stella, this is a sonnet sequence, and it is comprising of 108 sonnets and 11 songs, and is written in an elaborate and metaphorical style, and celebrates Sidney's that is Astrophel cast in the Sidney cast in the character of Astrophel, and his love for Penelope de Viru, who can easily be identified as Stella, the daughter of Earl of Essex. And then there is Arcadia, which is a pastoral romance interspersed with the verses, and it deals with the ideal of medieval chivalry, and hence the characters are not real but idealized. And you might already be knowing that Sidney, he was fatally wounded by a gunfire which he received in his thigh at the Battle of Zutphen, which was fought against the Spanish, and he died due to gangrene at the young age of 31. And there are many anecdotes that are associated with his chivalry, that how he had put down his armor which he was wearing on his thigh because one of the soldiers was not having his, and that was perhaps, and then he was fatally wounded later on. So these are the kind of anecdotes that are associated, the anecdotes of chivalry and bravery and generosity that are associated with the figure of Sidney. Then we move on to Spenser. And with Spenser, we find there is this emergence of a new poet, and he's known as the poet's poet. And these are his famous works: The Shepherd's Calendar, The Fairy Queen, Astrophel, Amoretti, Epithalamion, Prothalamion. Okay, so Shepherd's Calendar, this is a pastoral allegory, and it is modeled on Virgilian pastoral conventions. And Fairy Queen, this is an epic poem. I'll deal with it in detail maybe in the next slide. And then there is this Astrophel. Okay, you should remember Sidney has written Astrophel and Stella. So taking the idea, and Sidney was identified as Astrophel. So and you already know that Sidney, how he met an untimely death, and that is why Spenser wrote a pastoral elegy. And there were many pastoral elegies that were, or rather elegies that were written in memory of Sidney. And so you find this Astrophel, this is written by Spenser, and this was a pastoral elegy, and this was written on the untimely death of Sir Philip Sidney at the Battle of Zutphen. Then there is Amoretti. This is comprising of 89 love sonnets, and it reflects his craftsmanship. It deals with wooing of Spenser's future wife, Elizabeth Boyle. And then Epithalamion, Spenser makes a perfect blend of convention and emotions as he details the celebration of his own wedding and brings lyrical expressions to a new height. Then Epithalamion was written in the honor of marriage of the two daughters of Earl Worcester. Then I move on to Fairy Queen. I'll not be dealing with all the poems in detail. Rather, I have selected a few about which I'll talk a little more. Fairy, this was Spenser to write a national epic following the Greek, Roman, and Italian traditions, and also relied on the Arthurian romance. And taking this quotation from David Davis, he writes, it is an allegorical commentary on the religious, political, and social scene, as well as a more general poetic exploration of the nature of virtue. And it is a culmination of all major thoughts which were imbibed by Renaissance. In spite of various classical influences, the Fairy Queen invariably emerges as an English poem. And this was again modeled on one of the classics, that is Ariosto's Orlando Furioso. And the original plan of Spenser was to write it in 24 books, but actually he was able to complete only 6. So the 6 books that he has written, they reveal a particular virtue of the hero. King Arthur is represented as a model of all virtues, while Gloriana is represented as the ideal of womanhood and personification of Queen Elizabeth I. So you find that how in Fairy Queen, Spenser is specifically trying to glorify Queen Elizabeth and appreciating her virtues, and she's shown as someone who is a model of all virtues, as I said. And over here in this particular poem, you find that Spenser adopted a particular stanza form. This came to be known as the Sensarian Stanza. Each stanza has 9 lines, and the rhyme scheme is A B A B B C B C C. So that makes it 9 lines in a particular stanza. So the poem remains an unfinished epic, as Spenser's original plan was to write 24 books, but he was able to complete only 6, as I said. So there are these other people, and I'm speaking about them because in order to make you understand that there were these so many people who were writing, so many writers, poets who were indulging in works of creative writing, and how all of this helped in the consolidation of English literature, of Renaissance poetry. Okay, and of course, later on, it somehow or the other it influenced and consolidated English literature as such. So there was Samuel Daniel, who had written Delia. This is a sonnet sequence of 50 sonnets, and in him we find clear influences of Sidney, Petrarch, and other French and Italian sonneteers. Then there is Michael Drayton. He was inspired by both medieval and modern English history, Shepherd's Garland, Ballad of Agincourt Lodge, and then Idea. Idea again is a sonnet sequence. The final version was published in 1619. Then comes Sir Walter Raleigh. He wrote series of love poems addressed to Queen Elizabeth as Cynthia. So again, you will find this trend that how, particularly during the reign of Queen Elizabeth, how these writers, they were glorifying Queen Elizabeth. Okay, so you saw just Spenser writing about the fairy queen, and then there is Walter Raleigh writing this poem Cynthia, and these poems are written in the courtly love tradition. Queen Elizabeth, for him, that is for Walter Raleigh, the distant and unattainable ideal. Okay, and it was like she was an unattainable ideal for most of them, and who demands and enjoins duty, love, and loyalty. So, of course, Cynthia, this is a reference to Queen Elizabeth, and of course, there is the character has been taken from the Greek myth, that is, she's a Greco-Roman goddess. Queen Elizabeth was often appropriated with Cynthia and Diana. That is the usual trend that you find. Then there is another poet, Fulk Greville. He was greatly influenced by Sidney, and his important work is Silica. That is, it contains 109 lyrics, out of which 41 are sonnets. Then we move on to Shakespeare. Okay, so we see that, of course, you all know, you all are familiar with Shakespeare as a dramatist. Okay, he has always been applauded and widely read and enjoyed as a playwright, and of course, like how his plays have been adapted into films, okay, and into translated into different languages. But Shakespeare was also a poet of importance, okay, and particularly like if we speak of Venus and Adonis and the Rape of Lucrece and the sonnets that he has written. So speaking about Venus and Adonis, this is a narrative poem written in the pastoral tradition and is dedicated to the young Earl of Southampton. And rather I should say, both Venus and Adonis and Rape of Lucrece both are dedicated to Earl of Southampton. And the poem narrates the seduction of Adonis by Venus, the goddess of love. And the poem is again inspired by one of the important classical writers' works, that is Ovid's Metamorphoses. And then Rape of Lucrece, this is a narrative poem and is tragic and grave in its subject, as it deals with the rape of Lucrece, a Roman noble woman, by Sextus Tarquinius. And the poem abounds in rich poetic images and metaphors. And speaking about the sonnets of Shakespeare, Shakespeare wrote 154 sonnets, and later on when they were published, they were titled as Shakespeare's Sonnets. And these sonnets, they cover various themes of love, beauty, mortality, transience of time, jealousy, infidelity, and all of these. And so you'll find that out of these total 154 sonnets, sonnet 1 to 126 are addressed to a young man, and the identity of whom is not really very clear. And the sonnet number 127 to 152 are addressed to a dark lady. Again, she remains a mysterious lady, a mysterious woman. And the last two deal with the stories of Cupid. And Shakespearean sonnets are written in iambic pentameter. And as I said, that of course, that improvisation of the rhyme scheme that was done by Surrey, that was adopted by Shakespeare, and then it came to be associated with Shakespeare's name itself, the rhyme scheme. So that is A B A P C D C D E F E F G G. Sorry. So over here, I have also, like, in order to make the students understand, I have also written down these sonnets of Shakespeare, and particularly I'm referring to sonnet number 18 of Shakespeare, that is. And you can see the rhyme scheme and how these are these three quatrains and the couplet, and you will also find that how these themes that I talked about, they are how they are evident as you read and the sonnet. And the sonnet is amongst the most famous of the sonnets of Shakespeare. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So you find that how, of course, this is, since this is sonnet number 18, so this you can make it quite evident that this is addressed to the fair youth, and Shakespeare is comparing him to a summer's day. And then he is like, how you see that, of course, he's talking about the impermanence of beauty, and how death and decay is something which is inevitable, but he says that the beauty of the fair youth will not fade, because he will preserve this in through poetry. Okay, so there is how over here he says, when in eternal lines to time thou growest, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see. So how he is like, in a way, promising eternity to this fair youth, and he is promising that how his beauty will be preserved in rhyme, in poetry. Then there is this another Shakespearean sonnet. That time of year thou mayest in me behold, when yellow leaves or none of you do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold, their ruined choirs. Where late the sweet bird sang, in me thou seest the twilight of such day. So you find that how Shakespeare is talking about that he's aging, and this is something which cannot be stopped. Okay, so again, that theme of transience of youth and beauty. And then he says that like how since he is lying, or rather he is moving towards his old age, and ultimately he will die, then he says, as the deathbed whereon it must expire, consumed with what which it was nourished by, this thou perceivest, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well which thou must leave along. Okay, that is how, since he is like he's comparing himself to this ember, okay, which is turning into ashes, and so whatever spark is left behind, okay, how it becomes more more vivid. So likewise, his love has become it has become more stronger because of the very fact that he is nearing his death. Okay, so that was Shakespeare for you. Now we move on to Christopher Marlowe. Again, as I said, these Marlowe, Shakespeare, and Ben Jonson, these are the writers who were like you are more familiar with as dramatists, as playwrights, but they are also poets of significance. And Marlowe, as a student, he attempted translation of Ovid's elegies into English couplets, and his poem Passionate Shepherd to His Love, this proved to be a very popular lyric during his times. And Hero and Leander, this is an unfinished poem of 818 lines, was published posthumously in 1598 with certain additions by George Chapman. And Marlowe again took his inspiration from Ovid and also from Musaeus, a 5th century Greek poet. Then, of course, besides these writers that we have already discussed, there were certain specific schools, so to say, that were the writers which can be grouped together. They were not grouped during their own times, but rather it was only later that these poets came to be known as the metaphysical poets. Okay, so I'm talking about metaphysical poets, and then I will talk about the Cavalier poets. Okay, so the metaphysical poets, the term metaphysical poetry was coined much later by Samuel Johnson in his book, The Lives of the Most Eminent English Poets. And this was, he had used this term or this phrase for a group of 17th century poets for their emphasis on spoken quality of their verse and their use of wit and conceits. Okay, and then I quote Samuel Johnson himself. He writes that the metaphysical poets were men of learning, and to show their learning was their whole endeavor. The most heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence together. Nature and art ransacked for illustrations, comparisons, and allusions. Okay, so Samuel Johnson, of course, is using this term metaphysical not in a very appreciative manner, but rather he is like a little bit cynical about how these very far-fetched images, they are yoked together by violence. Okay, that is what he exactly says. So that is what that is the later on this particular thing was appreciated rather by none other than T.S. Eliot himself. Okay, so and it is only after the publication of this essay by T.S. Eliot titled as The Metaphysical Poets that there was a renewed interest for the metaphysical poets. Okay, and he appreciated, that is T.S. Eliot particularly appreciated the metaphysical poets for their unified sensibility. Okay, then he says that how there was a dissociation of sensibility afterwards. Okay, so that is something that was how T.S. Eliot has appreciated these poets, and how then of course they became more prominent. Otherwise they were not read or they were not appreciated for a long time. There was not much work that was being done on them until the 20th century. So the metaphysical poets, they moved away from the earlier artificial style and freed poetry from the conventions and introduced novel ideas into poetry. Now, these are the prominent, or rather, these are the metaphysical poets: John Dunn, George Herbert, Andrew Marvell, Richard Crashaw, and Henry Vaughan. And so you see that, of course, John Dunn, his poetry later on, when it was published into 2 volumes, Songs and Sonnets, and then Holy Sonnets. And Herbert, he wrote poetry in English, Latin, and Greek as well. His English poems were published in 1633 in a collection titled The Temple, Sacred Poems and Private Ejaculations. And Marvell, particularly, if we leave all the other contributions by Marvell, he is very famous for one poem of his, that is To His Coy Mistress. And of course, there is this theme of Kabdim that you find in metaphysical, in particularly in Andrew Marvell, not in all metaphysical. This is something that, this theme that will be revisited by the Cavalier poets, but over here this is it is quite distinct in particularly in Andrew Marvell. And then Richard Crashaw and his work Epigrammatum Sacrorum Liber, a book of sacred epigrams, then Steps to the Temple, Sacred Poems with Other Delights of the Muses, Carmen Dio Nostro, and then Henry Vaughan, that is Silex Scintillans, and 10th Satire of Juvenile English. Okay, so these are the works. And in order to just maybe make it more clear for the students that what I mean to say by this use of like paradoxical images that are brought together, or this use of the metaphysical conceit, and even a very like abrupt beginning that metaphysical poets are often associated with particularly John Donne. So there is this, I have taken few lines from one very famous poem of John Donne, A Valediction Forbidding Mourning, and the other one is Canonization. So in this poem, A Valediction Forbidding Mourning, there is this very unique sort of a comparison, okay, very like paradoxical things that have been compared together, and how he is comparing the 2 foot of a compass with the 2 lovers. The compass, if you can see, it is joined from above. So how he's how when the lover is parting and he is trying to reassure the beloved that when he will come back, okay, it is only like how they are distancing itself. It is only like a compass, okay, that they are their souls are united, and how the second hand or the second feet of the compass and the fixed foot is supporting the second foot. So this is a kind of a comparison, a weird comparison that how the lovers they are compared to the compass. Okay, so the poem, these lines, they go like this: if they be two, they are two, so as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul the fixed foot make no show to move, but doth if the other do. This was from A Valediction Forbidding Mourning, and the other one is Canonization. Again, there is a paradox in the title itself, and you see that how this process of canonization is a religious process by which a person is bestowed with sainthood. Okay, so how Donne is trying to prove, or rather through arguments, through the use of metaphysical wit and conceit, he is trying to convince that how the lovers, through their love, they will be canonized. Okay, and over here I'm rather only mentioning the opening lines, because the shocking style, the very abrupt beginning, okay, that is this poem, how it can be used as an example to show that. So he writes, for God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love, or chide my palsy or my gout, my 5 grey hairs or ruin fortune flout. With wealth your state, your mind with arts improve. Okay, so now I'll rather skip, because I think that I don't have much time left. It's already 7:30. So this I was trying to discuss this, but I'll skip this. This is a poem by Marlowe to his coy mistress. Okay, and then I move on to Ben Jonson. Again, he is also another playwright who excelled as a poet also. And Ben Jonson, as you are aware of, he was a man of learning, and very extensively read man. He read Greek and Latin classical works. And he was very thorough with the works of Aristotle and Horace and all. He excelled in writing masques. He was a high literary craftsman, and his lyrics stand out for their exuberance, sweetness, and grace. Then these are the major poetical works of Ben Jonson: To Penhurst, then My Picture Left in Scotland, and Song to Celia. And these lines, they are particularly very lyrical and sweet, and the kind of the hyperbolic style that has been adopted by the poet. He writes, drink to me only with thine eyes, and I will pledge with mine, or leave a kiss but in the cup, and I will not look for wine. Then I move on to Cavalier Poets, and these Cavalier Poets, literally Cavalier means a mounted soldier. Okay, so these poets, they supported and served King Charles I and during the English Civil War. And Cavalier poets were associated with the court. So again, these poets were also court poets. Their lyrics were witty, light and polished poems about love and its various aspects. And they abandoned the sonnet form. Most of them didn't write. There is only an exception that one of like few of them attempted few sonnets, but otherwise they made a conscious effort not to write sonnets. And then these Cavalier poets, they wrote poetry of courtship and gallantry, which was pleasing as well as virtuous. They drew upon the knowledge of classical writers like Horace, Cicero, and Ovid. And these Cavalier poets, they are also known as sons of Ben, as they were greatly influenced by Ben Jonson. And there is, of course, as I said, in the Cavalier poets, there is this theme of Kabdim, or seize the day, that is enjoy the moment. Okay, so that is what is reflected in their poetry as well. And the important Cavalier poets were Robert Herrick, Thomas Carew, Richard Loveless, and Sir John Suckling. And you see that Robert Herrick wrote over 2,500 poems. And Hesperides, and one of the poems is titled as To the Virgins to Make Much of Time. And herein you can see the example of this theme of Kabdim, okay, that is seize the day. As the poet writes, gather ye rosebuds while ye may, old time is still a-flying, and the same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. That is indicating that life is not eternal, okay? You are blessed with only life, so enjoy the moment. And so that is what Robert Herrick is writing, that gather ye rosebuds while ye may. And then the next Cavalier poet is Thomas Carew, and there is this collection of his. This poems is a collection of lyrics, songs, elegies, and pastorals, and subjects are love, beauty of the beloved, courtship, and lamentations for passing of friends and important figures. Then many poems are addressed to unidentified Celia, an elegy upon the death of the Dean of Paul's, Dr. John Dunn. Then another work is To Sex Him. Then to Ben Jonson upon occasion of his Ode of Defiance, and next to his play of the New Inn. These are the important works of Thomas Carew. Then moving on to Richard Loveless. He wrote around 200 poems, and he lived an exemplary life of a courtier, a soldier, and a lover. And he was persecuted for his support of King Charles I. And he wrote melodious lyrics, and a few of the examples I've given down. To Althea from prison, this was written during his imprisonment in 1642. Then there is To Lucasta going to the wars, written in 1640. And then he wrote a sonnet to General Goring, and these other works of his. Then the final Cavalier poet that we are discussing on, this is Sir John Suckling, and he wrote Ballad Upon a Wedding. This was composed for the marriage of Roger Boyle and Lady Margaret Howard. And then another work of his is the Sessions of the Poets. Now, I finally move on to our last, but not the least, okay, rather, he is one poet who remained popular, or who remains popular till this date, and a poet, like when I was in my MA at Aligarh, at AMU, I was like advised, there's Professor A.R. Kidwai, who used to teach us Paradise Lost, okay, and even when I am myself a teacher at Maulana Azad, Paradise Lost is still in the syllabus, okay, it is still finding its place in the syllabuses of today. So as I said, a poet, a towering figure, and particularly very well remembered for his poem Paradise Lost, which is rather a great epic poem. And Milton was a product of Puritan interregnum, and he witnessed the divisions and uncertainties of the period. He experimented with English and Latin meters, and the outcome was his first volume of verse titled Poems of Mr. John Milton, both English and Latin, and composed at several times. So one thing that is very outstanding about Milton, that is he was a voracious reader, and he was equally interested in the classics and the modern works, and he knew many languages: Greek, Latin, French, Hebrew, Spanish, and Latin. And as we had discussed with many other poets of the time, there was this fashion of undertaking a continental tour. Okay, so Milton has also undertaken a continental tour in 1638, and thereupon he chanced to meet Galileo. Okay, like for those who must have read Paradise Lost, you will find that there is mention when there is this Satan, the figure of Satan, or rather the character of Satan, and when he's being described, he is shown having a great, a huge shield that is hanging on his shoulder, and the circumference of this shield is being compared to what the moon circumference is when it is seen through the telescope of the Tuscan artist. Now, who is this Tuscan artist? Of course, it is the reference to Galileo, and so these contemporary scientific achievements that Milton was very familiar with. As I said, that he was a very learned man, he was a voracious reader, and to the extent that he was, like it is said, that he burned the midnight oil, and to the extent that he lost his eyesight, completely lost his eyesight by 1651. That is when he started working on Paradise Lost. He was already turning blind, and by the time Paradise Lost was published, or it came out, or it got completed, Milton has completely lost his eyesight. And these are the major poetical works of Milton. And there is this poem, you see that I've chronologically arranged these, and this is on the morning of Christ's nativity. This poem is celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ, and how this moment itself is so blessed. The birth of Jesus Christ is such a blessed moment that it destroys the power of pagan gods. Okay, so that is what Milton is celebrating in this particular poem. And then of course he goes on to also to talk about Christ, and how he will redeem the humanity and all of that. And then there is this poem on Shakespeare. This is a 16-line poem and is written in iambic pentameter, which celebrates the life and works of William Shakespeare, and it can also be considered as an epitaph written in the memory of a person who has died. And then there is a masque, and which later on came to be called as Como. This was a masque. This was initially titled as a masque presented at Ludlow Castle, and this was first published anonymously in 1637, and it deals with the slippery grounds of temptation and what motivates a tempter. It reflects the bearings of earlier court poetry. And then there is these two poems of his, El Allegro and El Penseroso. Both these poems, they represent opposite states of mind. If El Allegro strives to eliminate melancholy, then Penseroso is vouching for to cultivate melancholy. Okay, and Lycidas I will discuss in detail in the next slide. Then there is his another major work, that is Paradise Lost. Again, this is a very important epic poem that was written, because that was his dream, Milton's dream, to write a poem of epical dimensions, and how he was influenced by these great classical writers, okay, and Horace and Virgil and all, and Homer. And finally he succeeded in doing so, although he has gone completely blind. Then there is this, of course, then he has written this Paradise Regained, and this is speaking on the theme of human redemption, and is based on Christ's resistance to temptation and his absolute submission to the will of God. And then there is this another poem of his, that is Samson Agonistus. Now, speaking about Lycidas, Lycidas is an elegy written as a tribute to Edward King, who was a fellow student or a fellow scholar at Christ's College at Cambridge, and it occasions the drowning of Edward King in the Irish Sea in 1637. Okay, so this pastoral form, it is how one shepherd is lamenting on the death of a fellow shepherd, and how everything, the whole nature, how it is in lamentation. Okay, so this is this kind of style that was revived by these Renaissance poets, and this is, as I said, it is echoing the classical pastoral tradition, and the name itself, that is Lycidas, is taken from idylls of the Greek poet Theocritus, and this name Lycidas also occurs in Virgil and also in Ovid's work, that is Metamorphoses. Okay. Then pagan and Christian elements are blended together in this particular poem, and the poem evokes the redeeming powers of Christ. So like the whole idea, the name itself and the character and all of that is coming from the pagan classics, and then it is the Christian element that has been blended together in the poem, and you find that the poem is evoking the redeeming powers of Jesus Christ. That is when Lycidas resurfaces on the water, because as I said, that it is a tribute to Edward King, who was drowned in the Irish Sea. So at the end of towards the end of the poem Lycidas, you find that how the body of Lycidas is floating, or rather is coming back on the waters, and so it resurfaces on the water in which he got drowned, and enters. But there is, of course, a sort of a acceptance, or rather that how he is entering into a blessed state, and that is what the poem is celebrating about. Blessed kingdoms meek of joy and love. Then finally, this great epic poem that we mentioned about, that is Paradise Lost, and this the greatest epic poem in English literature, and this was written in blank verse, and it follows all the major classical rules, so to say. There is the poem begins in medias res, that is, it begins at the moment of crisis, okay, in the middle of the things. Okay, there is of course the poet is giving his reason for writing the poem. He is invoking the muses. Okay, so all of those those classical conventions of epic, they have been followed by Milton in this poem, and Milton is also making use of epic similes, and here he's again following the Greek and the Latin traditions of Homer and Virgil, and Milton reflects his knowledge of contemporary scientific achievements. As I said, that there is this reference to the Tuscan artist, and that is the reference to Galileo and his telescope, and it deals with the theme of disobedience and the consequent fall. So although how Milton has been held responsible for glorifying Satan by many critics, but the reality is that Milton's intention and his purpose, that he also states at the beginning of the poem, was to justify the ways of God to men, and to assert God's eternal providence. Okay, so the poem exhibits his knowledge of the classics, that is Milton's knowledge of the classics, like Homer's Iliad, Virgil's Aeneid, and Tasso's work also, and abounds in the echoes these earlier classics. So I've just quoted few lines from Paradise Lost. These are these speeches of Satan, although if taken separately, of course they convey something else, but if they are read in the context of the poem, then you understand that how Satan had this misplaced sense of being in a way oppressed. That is, he was considering himself to be more powerful, and this was like a kind of a misplaced sense of pride that he was having, and of course, when we talk about the paradise lost, or that is the loss of paradise of Adam and Eve, of course, we have to refer back to the first person to have lost paradise was Satan himself. Okay, that is Satan was thrown away from paradise, and he is also the seed of all disobedience. Okay, and that is why Milton's pretext was that he has in order to write about the loss of paradise of Adam and Eve, he has to speak about or the disobedience of Adam and Eve. He has to first speak about or write about the seed of all disobedience, and that he considered to be Satan. Okay, but when he is writing from the speeches that have been assigned to Satan, you see that how truthfully Milton has done that, and like literally going into the shoes of Satan and writing from his perspective. So how, as I said, that there is this, of course, this misplaced sense of pride and hurt that is there in Satan, and how there is a gradual fall in the character of Satan also. It is only in the book 1 that Satan has been described and dealt with in great detail, but later on, of course, and until the time that we reach book 9 and all, he turns into a serpent, and there is, of course, this evil side of Satan that comes forward. There is a gradual downfall, not only in his physical appearance but in his character as well. So these lines, although they are quite famous, but of course they should not be taken in isolation. They have to be understood in a particular context. And it says, a mind not to change by place, not to change by place or time. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven, and then better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. So these are the kind of ideas that Satan is expressing, but of course you have to, as I said, it has to be taken in a particular context. Then this final poem of Milton that I am dealing with, that is Samson Agonistus. This deals with the tragedy of blinded Samson, the ruined hero of Israel. And over here you see that Milton upholds and reiterates the Christian values and God's design. He succeeds in adapting the design of a Greek tragedy to convey a Christian message. Then, of course, these are the concluding remarks. I come to an end of my lecture. So you can yourself observe that how when we say that the Renaissance poets, they were imitating the past, this is not in any way belittling their importance. Okay, it is rather how they provided a firm ground to the later English poets. Okay, and the poets of the time, they were experimenting with the various poetic forms. As we saw, they wrote elegies, epics, pastoral romances, sonnets, okay, lyrics. So all of these forms that they were reviving and taking inspiration from the past writers, giving their own creative bit to that, and of course that was wonderful in itself. And this is how they paved way for the modern poetry as you find it today. And the Renaissance poets, they provided a distinct identity to English language and literature. And Renaissance closes with the towering figure of Milton and his poetry, which reaches its highest point in the his epic The Paradise Lost, which blends all the diverse elements of the time. Okay, so thank you. And here I am. This is Florence, Italy. In the background, you see that the skyline of Florence, and taken from the Michelangelo Hill or the Piazzale Michelangelo. This is a photograph of mine taken in 2009. Okay, thanks a lot for listening so patiently.
Thank you, ma'am. The session was really very enriching. I open the floor for the question. If any participant is having any question, they can type their question in the chat box, or they can also unmute themselves and ask the questions. Observations are also welcomed. Any participant?
Okay, Debi Das Mukherjee is saying, thanks a lot, ma'am, for giving this presentation. Okay, I couldn't read the whole thing, so maybe I can open the chat box. Okay, thanks to all of you, also all the students and the teachers, the staff of Karim City College and other faculty members who were present here. Like to have patiently listened to all those things that I was talking about. So it was a pleasure to deliver this session. And Saima is also saying, thank you, ma'am, for such an amazing session. Okay, thanks a lot, all of you.
It means the session was too good, ma'am. I think no questions. Yeah, things were very clear to them.
I tried to be very simple, although I thought that this was not the kind of a lecture that usually you present basing on your paper or something like that. This was from the perspective of a class teacher or a teacher delivering a lecture to the students. So I had made it like that.
It was, ma'am. It was, ma'am. Any participant with any question here?
Saket, questions are not there.
Maybe just observations, or maybe
No.
if anything, just you
Okay.
want to discuss. Questions तो मैं खुद भी अब मैं थक चुकी हूँ. Totally tired. Saima is also saying thank you so much.
We have the students of BA Sem 1, ma'am, BA Sem 6, PG Sem 1, and some research scholars along with some teachers are also here among the participants.
Oh, thanks a lot to all of them to have listened to me so patiently, and the teachers. Like I'm feeling humbled that the teachers were also there and they were listening for I think 1.5 hour, almost 1.5 hour to me, and I had to rush through a few of my slides because it was almost 1 hour, and I saw that I had not even got middle way, so I then had to rush.
Saket, there is one question.
There is one question, ma'am, in the chat box. Can I read it out, ma'am?
Arzu Naz is perhaps asking something. Did love and religious poems achieve their goals? How did the religion and love poems affected the society? And why do we find satirical type of poetry towards the end of the Elizabethan period? Okay, so there are lots of hows and whys that are there that Arzu is asking. Yes, as I said, love and religion was not exclusive. Okay, there was a blend of the two. For example, even when these metaphysical writers, metaphysical poets, when they were writing, their poems were not exclusively religious or exclusively, they were not, of course, there is a blend of that. And of course, they were presenting their viewpoint. Of course, it was changing or bringing in a change in the society of the time. And then, of course, there was this political changes that were coming in, and perhaps that led to the satirical kind of poetry that not exactly by the end of the Elizabethan period, but rather, of course, this will be more prevalent once the Renaissance closes on. That is what I personally feel. Then, is there any other question?
Yes, ma'am. There is one more question by Vishal Gorai.
Vishal Gorai, yes. Does any difference made the Renaissance poetry after the coming of the Puritan movement? Okay. Yes, of course, there is a difference, if not very marked, but there is a difference once there is this in the interregnum period that you see, and as I said, that how Milton was writing during this period, and how there was a difference. Initially, of course, it was more of the poetry that was being written was to appreciate the the royalty, the kings and the queens, and then of course more thoughtful things and more when this was coming in, of course there was this whole, and like in Milton you will find that he is also trying to prove himself to be religious poet, a poet who was attached to his religion, who was like totally loyal to his cause, but at the same time, of course, there was this Renaissance aspect that was there, that the assertion of the individuality that is there, and that is wherein he's also criticized for presenting Satan in a particular way that he did. Okay, so that is it. And Kundan Kumar is saying, did Renaissance have any impact on American literature? I have to think about it. It's an interesting question, and maybe I have to ponder over it for some more time, and then maybe you can take my email address from Saket, and then maybe later on I will be able to answer in a more in a proper way and more informed manner, I should say, that way. Then what else? Kahan gaya?
We can take, ma'am, one or two more questions.
Okay. Saket, can you just tell me which one? Because
okay, ma'am.
By Kumar Yashwant.
Yes, ma'am. Kumar Yashwant is asking, does Renaissance in England influenced Age of Enlightenment in Germany? If yes, then how?
Okay, Renaissance in England influenced Age of Enlightenment in Germany. I think it is rather the other way around, that how because England was the last place where Renaissance reached, and so somehow or the other, of course, these ideas that were there, they passed on to other nations, and how particularly the exploration beyond the horizons and all of that, so that somehow or the other it affected the Enlightenment. So that is it.
Yes, ma'am. One more question is there. He's a singer. He is our pass out student, Suman. He's asking, okay, ma'am, Renaissance poems was often accompanied by music.
Yes.
Can you give some elaborative views on this context?
So, because that this particular tradition was carried on from the medieval times, and how there was this tradition, or rather, even in the other, if we talk about Italy, even if we talk about the other poetic forms, we see that how lyrics and sonnets, they were often sung with accompaniment, and so this was how this was trying to celebrate life, and so music was best suited to that, and that is one of the reasons that initially, when particularly in the early phase of Renaissance, we find that there was this trend of poems often set to accompaniment of music that was there.
Yes, ma'am. It has been a long session. There are more questions, but I think participants will understand that it has been a long one, and it has been very tiring for you as well. So I invite Dr. Neha Tiwari, ma'am, to propose the vote of thanks. Neha, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Saket, and yes, this responsibility of offering gratitude to Humaji has been entrusted on me, and definitely this has been a very exhaustive session for you, because continuously, like from past almost 90 minutes, you are speaking on such a huge body of work of Renaissance, which is not easy. And I think Yaya sir has taken the advantage of the friendship which he has with you, and of course he thought that you are the only one who can justify with this kind of elaborative work, because poetry is something which demands so much explanation, right from form to theme. And let me say that you have justified and his expectation definitely. And as we were mentioning, In fact, you were reciting that shall I compare thee to a summer's day, and the last lines were like so long as men can breathe. So I would like to say that so long as Department of English, Karim City College is there, we would like always you to be there and with our students, and this association, this companionship should always be remain forever. So thank you so much for giving so much time, patience, energy in preparing all those slides. And definitely students have been enriched. In fact, as a teacher, we were also going through all the slides and all the information which you were giving, and it was definitely enriching for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Neha. It was indeed my pleasure, and that is a huge, and I am saying this from the bottom of my heart, this is a huge compliment that you gave, and it will indeed be my pleasure to be associated lifelong with your college and with you. I have seen there. And so all of you, and you all have almost become a family. I've seen you like online so many times, and maybe in future, if God willing, that maybe you all can visit Lucknow, or if I'm there at your place, definitely we'll get to meet each other. So it was indeed an honor and pleasure to be here, and because Dr. Yahya already knows that I'm a little bit of a talkative person, so I personally like I have not taken this profession just by chance. This is by choice, and I personally enjoy teaching students. So that is why I like all of these sessions, and like this is one place and a platform for me indeed to like share my knowledge and to interact with students. Albeit this is online, but I enjoy this, and it was indeed a great pleasure and an honor to be with you all. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Yes, we also enjoyed. Yeah.
Ma'am,
Thank you.